Hey nerdfighters, let's dive into the fascinating world of Korean history. It's a roller coaster ride of epic proportions. We're talking ancient kingdoms, dynastic drama, and cultural revolutions. Korea's story is like a binge-worthy Netflix series, but way cooler because it actually happened. Picture this, a peninsula hanging off the edge of East Asia. It's been the stage for some of history's most intense dramas. We've got warring kingdoms, invasions, and cultural explosions. From the invention of movable type, before Gutenberg, mind you, to the modern phenomenon of K-pop, Korea's been shaping world culture for centuries. This small peninsula has faced countless challenges. Invasions, occupations, war, you name it, Korea's been through it, yet it's emerged as a global powerhouse. Let's get started. All right, let's rewind the clock, way back. We're talking prehistoric times here. The Korean peninsula wasn't always the Korea we know today. It was home to various tribes and small kingdoms. These early Koreans were tough cookies. They had to be living in a land of harsh winters and mountainous terrain. Now let's fast forward a bit to around 2333 BCE. This is when things get really interesting. According to legend, this is when Korea's first kingdom was founded. The founder, a mythical figure named Dangun. While Dangun might be legendary, the kingdom he supposedly founded, Gojoseon, was very real. Gojoseon was like the training wheels of Korean civilization. It laid the groundwork for what was to come. They developed bronze tools, started farming, and even had a social hierarchy. But Gojoseon wasn't alone. Other small kingdoms popped up too. It was like a political petri dish, with different systems and cultures growing side by side. Ancient Korean scholar. But here's where it gets really cool. Around the 4th century BCE, iron technology hit the scene, and let me tell you, iron was a game changer. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff, the Three Kingdoms period. This is like the Game of Thrones of Korean history, minus the dragons, unfortunately. We've got three main players, Goguryeo in the north, Baekje in the southwest, and Silla in the southeast. These kingdoms weren't just neighbors, they were fierce rivals. Let's start with Goguryeo. These guys were the tough guys of ancient Korea. They controlled a massive territory, including parts of Manchuria. They were known for their military prowess and their ability to fend off Chinese invasions. Ancient Korean scholar, next up, we have Baekje. If Goguryeo was the muscle, Baekje was the brain. They were known for their sophisticated culture and diplomacy. Last but not least, we have Silla. Through clever diplomacy and military strategy, they eventually came out on top. Spoiler alert, Silla eventually unifies Korea, but we'll get to that in the next section. So remember how I said Silla was the underdog? Well, prepare to have your mind blown. In 660 CE, Silla pulled off the ultimate upset. With help from their Tang dynasty allies in China, they conquered Baekje. Then, in 668, they took down the mighty Goguryeo. Just like that, the three kingdoms became one. Ancient Korean scholar, but here's the twist: after unification, Silla had to deal with its former ally, the Tang dynasty. The Chinese weren't too keen on leaving the peninsula, so Silla had to fight them off too, but it worked. By 676, Silla had kicked out the Tang and unified most of the Korean peninsula. This began the period known as Unified Silla. The Unified Silla period was a golden age for Korea. Buddhism flourished, art and culture thrived, and the capital city of Gyeongju became one of the largest cities in the world. Silla also established a unique social structure called the bone rank system. Ancient Korean scholar. But all good things must come to an end. By the late 9th century, Silla was in decline. This turbulent time set the stage for the rise of a new dynasty, Goryeo. Section 5, the Goryeo dynasty, cultural flourishing and Mongol invasions. Enter the Goryeo dynasty.
These folks came onto the scene in 918 CE and stuck around until 1392.
Fun fact, the name Korea actually comes from Goryeo.
The founder Wang Jeon united the later three kingdoms and established a dynasty that would leave a lasting mark on Korean history.
Now, the Goryeo period was a time of incredible cultural achievements. Buddhism reached its peak, influencing art, architecture, and daily life.
They produced some of the most beautiful ceramics in the world, including the famous Celadon pottery.
They also printed books using movable metal type, centuries before Gutenberg did in Europe.
But it wasn't all pottery and printing presses. the Goryeo dynasty faced some serious challenges. The biggest of these, the Mongols.
Starting in the 13th century, the Mongols invaded Korea multiple times.
After decades of resistance, Goryeo finally submitted to Mongol overlordship in 1270.
Despite Mongol domination, Goryeo managed to maintain much of its culture and internal structure.
But by the late 14th century, things were falling apart. Political corruption, economic troubles, and social unrest were rampant.
This set the stage for a military coup that would usher in a new dynasty, Joseon, but that's a tale for our next chapter. Section 6, Joseon Dynasty, Korea's Golden Age. Alright folks, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the longest ruling dynasty in Korean history, the Joseon Dynasty.
These guys were in power from 1392 to 1910.
To put that in perspective, that's longer than the entire history of the United States.
The Joseon dynasty was founded by Yi Seong-gye, a general who overthrew the last king of Goryeo.
The Joseon period is often considered Korea's golden age. They adopted Confucianism as the state ideology, which had a profound impact on Korean society, politics, and culture.
One of the coolest things about the Joseon period was their focus on science and technology.
They also built the famous Gyeongbokgung Palace in Seoul, which still stands today as a testament to their architectural prowess.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Despite these challenges, the Joseon dynasty managed to survive and even thrive, leaving an indelible mark on Korean culture and identity. Section 7, Cultural Achievements, the birth of Hangul.
Now, let's talk about one of the coolest things to come out of the Joseon dynasty, Hangul, the Korean alphabet. This isn't just any alphabet, folks. It's widely considered one of the most scientific and logical writing systems in the world.
In 1443, King Sejong the Great decided that the existing writing system, which used Chinese characters, was too complicated for ordinary people to learn. So he did what any good leader would do. He invented a new alphabet.
It's like if President Obama had decided that English was too hard and created a new language, except King Sejong actually did it. Hangul was designed to be easy to learn and use. Each letter represents a specific sound, and the shapes of the consonants are based on the shape of the mouth when making that sound.
When it was first introduced, the document explaining it said, "A wise man can acquaint himself with them before the morning is over. A stupid man can learn them in the space of 10 days.
But here's the twist. Despite its brilliance, Hangul wasn't immediately popular. Today, it's used by both couriers and is a source of national pride.
Section 8, the era of Japanese occupation.
All right, now we're entering a darker chapter of Korean history, the Japanese occupation. This period lasted from 1910 to 1945, and it was a tough time for Korea. Imagine if your nosy neighbor suddenly decided to move in, take over your house, and tell you how to live.
Japan had been eyeing Korea for a while, seeing it as a strategic foothold on the Asian mainland. They gradually increased their influence through a series of treaties, and in 1910 they formally annexed Korea.
The Korean royal family was stripped of power, and Korea became a colony of Japan. The Japanese occupation was marked by attempts to erase Korean culture and identity. They banned the Korean language in schools, forced Koreans to adopt Japanese names, and even tried to replace Korean historical narratives with their own.
But Koreans didn't take this lying down. There was significant resistance, both passive and active. The March 1st movement of 1919 saw widespread peaceful protests across the country.
This period left deep scars on the Korean psyche, influencing Korean-Japanese relations to this day.
Section 9, Korea Divided, the Korean War and its aftermath.
As World War II came to an end in 1945, Korea was liberated from Japanese rule. But the celebration was short-lived. Instead of gaining independence, Korea found itself divided.
The United States and the Soviet Union, in their infinite wisdom, decided to split Korea along the 38th parallel. The North went to the Soviets, the South to the Americans.
Tensions between the two sides escalated, leading to the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. The Korean War was brutal. North Korea, backed by China, and the Soviet Union invaded the South. The United Nations, led by the US, came to South Korea's aid. For 3 years, the peninsula was a battleground.
The war ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty.
The division of Korea remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Cold War, a constant reminder of the human cost of ideological conflicts. Imagine a 250-kilometer-long do-not-cross line, complete with soldiers, landmines, and decades of tension. That's the DMZ.
Section 10, South Korea's economic miracle.
Now let's focus on South Korea for a bit. After the Korean War, South Korea was in shambles. It was one of the poorest countries in the world, but what happened next is nothing short of miraculous.
In the 1960s, under President Park Chung-hee, South Korea embarked on an ambitious program of industrialization. They focused on export-oriented industries like textiles, steel, and shipbuilding.
The government worked closely with big businesses, creating what became known as chaebols, large family-owned conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai. The results were astounding. South Korea's economy grew at an average of 10% per year in the 1960s and 70s.